Shelby Washington was still holding her mother's hand when the machines flatlined. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and dying flowers. Nathaniel stood near the window in his expensive charcoal suit, already checking his phone, while Shelby shattered beside the bed. Then her mother suddenly tightened her weak fingers around Shelby's wrist. "Charlotte Bennett," she whispered desperately. "That's your real name. Don't trust." The words died with her. Shelby froze. Charlotte Bennett, not Shelby Washington, not the name she had lived with for 34 years. And when she turned toward her husband in confusion, Nathaniel's face lost color for exactly 1 second before he forced a smile. "Your mother was confused," he said, softly. But that was the moment Shelby realized everyone in her life might have been lying to her. If you've ever discovered that the people closest to you were hiding something devastating, this story will stay with you until the very end. And tell me in the comments, would you keep digging for the truth if it meant destroying your entire life? 3 days after the funeral, Shelby Washington stood alone in the kitchen of the sprawling Connecticut home she had spent 11 years turning into something warm enough to survive inside. Rain slid slowly down the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the backyard. The hydrangeas Shelby planted herself bent beneath the storm, fragile and heavy with water. Everything in the house looked expensive. Marble countertops, imported light fixtures, custom cabinetry. Nathaniel once bragged about to guests as if he had built them himself, but the house felt cold now. Not empty, cold, like a museum pretending to be a marriage. Shelby wrapped both hands around a mug of untouched coffee and stared at the baby bracelet lying on the counter. Charlotte Bennett. The tiny, faded letters seemed impossible every time she looked at them. Her real name. The name her mother had died trying to say. Behind her, the soft, clicking sound of Italian leather shoes echoed across the hardwood floor. Nathaniel. "You should eat something," he said calmly. Shelby didn't turn around. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't slept, and you noticed that between conference calls, the silence stretched just long enough to irritate him. Nathaniel Washington hated emotional tension unless he controlled it. Shelby finally looked at him. He was still beautiful in the way polished men often were. Dark, tailored suit, expensive watch, perfect haircut, controlled expression. The kind of man people trusted immediately because he knew how to smile without revealing anything real. He had built a reputation as one of the sharpest corporate attorneys in New York. But Shelby suddenly realized she had no idea who her husband really was. Nathaniel loosened his tie slightly. "Your mother was sick for a long time, Shelby." She said a name. She was confused. She sounded terrified. She was dying. The cruelty in his tone was subtle. Nathaniel rarely raised his voice. He preferred making people feel irrational instead. Shelby looked back down at the bracelet. "You didn't seem surprised." That made him pause, only for a second. But Shelby noticed. Nathaniel walked toward the kitchen island, slowly careful like a man approaching a wounded animal. "You're grieving," he said gently. "Your mind is trying to create meaning where there isn't any." There it was. The calm manipulation, the quiet rewriting of reality. Shelby used to mistake it for intelligence. Now it sounded rehearsed. "My mother whispered a name she claimed was mine," Shelby said. "Then she died." Nathaniel exhaled slowly like she was exhausting him. "You need rest." "No, I need the truth." His jaw tightened. That tiny shift in his expression scared her more than yelling would have. For years, Shelby had made excuses for every emotional absence in their marriage. Nathaniel worked hard. Nathaniel was under pressure. Nathaniel showed love differently. Nathaniel didn't mean the sharp comments. Nathaniel didn't realize how lonely she was. But grief had stripped something raw inside her. And now every ignored moment suddenly looked different. Every canceled anniversary dinner, every time he mocked her for being too sensitive, Every conversation where he made her feel small for asking simple questions. The doorbell rang. Nathaniel immediately stepped back from the counter. "I'll get it." Shelby watched him leave. Her chest tightened. Something felt wrong. Not dramatic, not obvious, just wrong. She followed quietly into the foyer. Nathaniel opened the front door only halfway. A man in a dark coat stood outside holding an envelope. "I was told Mrs. Washington requested these records," the man said. Nathaniel's posture instantly stiffened. "You have the wrong address." The man glanced down at his notes. "Private delivery for Shelby Washington." Shelby stepped forward immediately. "That's me." Nathaniel's eyes flashed. Fast. Dangerously fast. The man handed Shelby the envelope. "Signature required." Nathaniel intercepted before she could take it. "I'll handle it." "No," Shelby said firmly. The delivery man awkwardly passed the papers directly to her instead. Nathaniel smiled politely until the door shut. Then the smile disappeared. "What is that?" Shelby looked down. The envelope had no return address. Only one typed sentence for Charlotte Bennett. A chill moved through her body. Nathaniel held out his hand immediately. "Give it to me." "Why?" "Because this is exactly what I'm talking about. Someone is taking advantage of your emotional state." Shelby stared at him. "You already knew that name." "That's ridiculous." "You reacted." "I reacted because my wife is spiraling after burying her mother." There it was again. Spiraling. Crazy. Unstable. Shelby suddenly remembered every argument they'd had over the years. Nathaniel always won by making her question herself. Never loudly, never violently, just carefully enough to leave no bruises anyone else could see. She stepped backward. "I'm opening it." Nathaniel's voice hardened. "Shelby." That tone froze her. Not because it was loud, because it wasn't, because it sounded like a warning. Slowly, she opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies, hospital records, adoption filings, and one grainy photograph. Shelby's breath caught instantly. The woman in the photo looked exactly like her. Not similar. Exactly. Same eyes, same mouth, same dark hair. The photo was labeled Elizabeth Bennett with daughter Charlotte, 1992. Shelby's hands started shaking violently. "No." Nathaniel stepped forward too quickly. "Let me see those." Shelby pulled back instinctively. "Who is she? I don't know." "You're lying." His expression darkened. For the first time in years, Shelby realized her husband didn't look annoyed. He looked afraid. That terrified her more than anything else. Nathaniel rubbed a hand across his face. "Shelby, listen to me carefully. People with money attract problems. Scams. Extortion attempts. She looks exactly like me. Coincidence? No." Her voice cracked. "No, Nathaniel. No." The room suddenly felt smaller, harder to breathe inside. Shelby flipped through more pages. Legal forms, medical notes, one document partially blacked out, and then a familiar name. Richard Washington Legal Group, Nathaniel's father's firm. Shelby slowly looked up, the blood drained from Nathaniel's face. "You knew," she whispered. "Nathaniel, you knew. It's complicated." That answer destroyed something inside her instantly. Because innocent people didn't say it's complicated. Innocent people said no. Shelby backed away from him. Her husband reached toward her carefully. "Shelby, please calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down. She lied to you your whole life. My mother protected me." "You don't know that." "No," Shelby whispered. "I don't know anything anymore." Nathaniel stepped closer. She was mentally unstable near the end. Shelby stared at him in disbelief. "You're talking about the woman who raised me." "I'm trying to help you." "No," she said softly. "You're trying to control this." His eyes narrowed instantly, and there it was. The real Nathaniel. Cold, calculating, watching her too carefully, like he was assessing damage. Shelby suddenly noticed something else. Nathaniel's phone was vibrating repeatedly on the kitchen counter. A name flashed across the screen. Olivia. He quickly flipped the phone over. Too quickly. Shelby's stomach dropped. Who's Olivia? Nathaniel didn't answer fast enough. That silence told her everything. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to feel the first crack splitting open beneath her entire life. Nathaniel walked toward her again, lowering his voice. Whatever you think is happening right now, you need to stop digging. Shelby's heart pounded. Why? His gaze locked onto hers. Because for one terrifying second, Nathaniel Washington looked genuinely scared of what she might discover. The funeral ended beneath gray skies and carefully rehearsed sympathy. Shelby stood near the church entrance long after most of the guests had disappeared, watching black luxury cars pull away one by one across the wet pavement. Everything about the day had felt wrong. Too polished, too controlled, too quiet. People hugged her without really touching her. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men from Nathaniel's law firm offered stiff condolences before immediately checking their watches. And every single time Shelby mentioned her mother's final words, the room shifted. Eyes avoided hers. Conversations died. Even the priest looked uncomfortable. It made her skin crawl. Nathaniel stood several feet away, speaking with two senior partners from Washington Legal Group. Calm, elegant, untouched by grief. Shelby suddenly realized he had not cried once. Not at the hospital, not during the burial, not even while lowering flowers onto her mother's coffin. He had simply performed sadness the way wealthy men performed everything else. Perfectly. Her heels clicked softly against the church floor as she walked back inside to escape the cold. The sanctuary was nearly empty now. Rows of white lilies surrounded the altar. Candlelight flickered against stained glass windows, while funeral staff quietly removed programs from the pews. Shelby stared at the large framed photograph of her mother. Helen Washington, the woman who had raised her, protected her, loved her fiercely, and apparently lied to her every day of her life. A lump formed painfully in Shelby's throat. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "You weren't supposed to find out here." The voice startled her. Shelby turned sharply. An older woman stood near the back pew, wearing a camel wool coat and pearl earrings. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the rain outside. Elegant, wealthy, composed. But her eyes looked devastated. Shelby had never seen her before. The woman stepped closer, slowly studying Shelby's face with terrifying intensity. Then tears filled her eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered shakily. "You have Elizabeth's eyes." Shelby's chest tightened instantly. "Who are you?" The woman ignored the question. Instead, she reached trembling fingers toward Shelby's cheek before stopping herself. "You look exactly like her." Shelby stepped backward instinctively. "I think you have me confused with someone else." The woman's face broke apart completely. "No," she said softly. "No, sweetheart. They confused you." Shelby froze. Sweetheart. The word hit strangely hard after days of cold condolences and controlled grief. "My name is Eleanor Bennett." Bennett. Again. That name again. Shelby felt the blood drain slowly from her body. The older woman noticed immediately. "She told you before she died, didn't she?" Shelby's lips parted soundlessly. Eleanor exhaled shakily and sat down in the nearest pew as if her legs could no longer support her. "Oh, Helen," she whispered. "You finally did it." Shelby stared at her. "Who is Charlotte Bennett?" Eleanor looked up, and for one terrible second, Shelby saw pure guilt in the woman's eyes. Then grief. Then something even worse. Fear. "You," Eleanor whispered. The church suddenly felt ice cold. Shelby shook her head immediately. "No." "Yes." "No." Eleanor slowly opened her handbag and pulled out an old photograph. Shelby didn't want to look, but she did. A younger version of Eleanor stood beside a beautiful, dark-haired woman holding a little girl in pink overalls. The little girl had Shelby's face. Exactly Shelby's face. The same dimple in her chin, the same dark curls, the same eyes. Shelby physically staggered backward. That's impossible. The older woman's voice trembled. Her name was Elizabeth Bennett. She was your biological mother. Shelby's heartbeat thundered violently. No! She was my daughter. No! And you, Eleanor whispered through tears, are Charlotte Rose Bennett. Shelby's knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the edge of the pew to steady herself. Everything inside her felt disconnected, like reality had suddenly split open beneath her feet. My mother's name was Helen. Helen raised you. Helen was my mother. She loved you very much. Stop saying it like that. Shelby's voice echoed sharply through the empty sanctuary. Eleanor flinched. Shelby pressed a shaking hand over her mouth, instantly horrified by her own outburst. But panic was swallowing her alive now. You don't get to walk in here and tell me my entire life isn't real. Eleanor's eyes filled again. We searched for you for years. Shelby stared at her in disbelief. What? Until Richard Washington intervened. That name hit Shelby like ice water. Nathaniel's father, Richard Washington, senior partner, powerful attorney, respected philanthropist. Shelby's stomach twisted violently. What does Richard Washington have to do with this? Eleanor hesitated. Too long. Shelby noticed immediately. What did he do? Before Eleanor could answer, footsteps echoed through the church. Nathaniel. His expression changed the instant he saw Eleanor. Not surprise. Recognition. Shelby saw it immediately. Nathaniel stopped walking altogether. The mask slipped for half a second. And Shelby finally understood something horrifying. Her husband had known this woman already. Nathaniel, Eleanor said quietly. His jaw tightened. Mrs. Bennett. Mrs. Bennett. Not confusion. Not introduction. Recognition. Shelby looked between them in stunned silence. You know each other? Nathaniel recovered quickly. Too quickly. My father represented the Bennett family years ago. Shelby stared at him. You lied to me. Nathaniel ignored that completely. Instead, he looked directly at Eleanor. This isn't the place for this conversation. Eleanor rose slowly from the pew. She deserves the truth. Nathaniel's voice hardened instantly. She deserves stability. Shelby blinked. There it was again. That word, hidden beneath every conversation. Fragile, emotional, unstable. Like everyone had already agreed what kind of woman she was behind closed doors. Shelby slowly turned toward her husband. How long have you known? Nathaniel rubbed his jaw tightly. Shelby. How long? The silence answered first. Then a few years. The words hit harder than screaming would have. Shelby felt her chest cave inward. A few years I was trying to protect you. Protect me from my own name. People still remained in the church foyer outside. Shelby could feel eyes drifting toward them now. Nathaniel lowered his voice immediately. Not here. No, Shelby whispered. You don't get to control where this conversation happens. Eleanor stepped forward carefully. Helen didn't steal you. Shelby looked at her sharply. Then why did she change my name? The older woman's expression darkened with pain. Because your mother died. Shelby stopped breathing. What Elizabeth died after the custody battle began. Custody battle. The words sounded monstrous. Shelby shook her head slowly. No, there were people fighting over the Bennett estate, over guardianship, over money. Nathaniel suddenly stepped forward. That's enough. Eleanor ignored him. Helen took you and disappeared before they could use you. Shelby's vision blurred. Use her. Nathaniel grabbed Shelby gently by the arm. We're leaving. She pulled away immediately. Don't touch me. For For the first time in years, genuine anger flashed across his face. Not annoyance, not irritation, anger. It vanished quickly when he noticed other people watching. But Shelby saw it. And once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. Eleanor reached into her purse again and handed Shelby a folded piece of paper. "Your mother left this with me years ago." Nathaniel moved instantly. "Don't." Shelby stared at him, not because of the warning itself, because of the fear behind it. Her hands shook as she unfolded the paper. One sentence, written in faded blue ink. "If anything happens to me, never trust the Washingtons." Shelby slowly looked up. Nathaniel had gone completely pale. Shelby waited until after midnight to go back to her mother's house. Not Helen's house. Her mind kept catching on that now. Every memory suddenly felt unstable, fragile, rearranged by invisible hands. The small colonial-style home sat alone at the end of a quiet street in New Haven, wrapped in darkness and rainwater. Shelby parked across from the curb and stared at it through the windshield for nearly 5 minutes before forcing herself to move. She still had the folded note in her coat pocket. Never trust the Washingtons. Nathaniel had called her 12 times since the funeral. She ignored every single one. The silence between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like survival. Shelby unlocked the front door slowly. The familiar scent of lavender and old books hit her instantly, almost painful in its familiarity. This was the house where Helen braided her hair before school, where they baked cinnamon bread every Christmas morning, where Shelby cried after her first heartbreak at 16. Nothing inside the house had changed, except her. She stepped into the living room and froze. A lamp was on. Shelby's pulse jumped violently. Nathaniel. No answer. Only silence. Then Shelby. Her Aunt Diane emerged from the kitchen, holding a mug of tea. Shelby exhaled sharply in relief. "You scared me." Diane Bennett looked exhausted. Her makeup had smeared slightly beneath tired eyes, and her gray sweater hung loosely around thin shoulders. But Shelby barely noticed any of that. She noticed the last name, Bennett. Not Washington, not Carter, Bennett. "How long have you known?" Shelby asked quietly. Diane closed her eyes. "Too guilty to pretend anymore. Since the day Helen brought you home." The words sliced cleanly through Shelby's chest. Shelby laughed once, not because anything was funny, because it hurt too badly not to. "Wow." "Honey?" "No," Shelby whispered. "Don't honey me right now." Diane set the mug down carefully. "Helen loved you more than anything. Then why did she lie to me?" Tears filled Diane's eyes instantly. "She promised Elizabeth she'd protect you." Protect. Everyone kept using that word, as if destroying someone's identity counted as protection. Shelby dropped her purse onto the couch. "I need the truth." Diane hesitated. That hesitation enraged Shelby instantly. "You all keep doing that," she snapped. "You look at me like I'm going to break if someone finally tells me the truth. You don't understand how dangerous those people were. The Washingtons." Diane's silence answered everything. Shelby's stomach twisted violently. "Oh my God." Diane sank slowly into an armchair. "Your biological mother came from old money. Real money. Bennett Holdings was worth hundreds of millions before Elizabeth even turned 30. Shelby stared blankly. "This is insane. It was worse after your grandfather died. Everyone wanted control of the company. Your mother inherited voting shares. The board hated her because she refused to let them strip the foundation assets." Shelby rubbed trembling hands across her face, and somehow Nathaniel's family became involved. Diane nodded slowly. Richard Washington represented the Bennett board during the legal battles. Shelby suddenly remembered the document in the envelope. Richard Washington Legal Group. Her breathing became shallow. He knew who I was. Yes, Nathaniel knew. Another silence, another answer. Shelby turned away sharply, pressing a hand against her mouth as emotion crashed violently into her chest. 11 years. 11 years married to a man who apparently knew her real identity before she did. The betrayal felt so deep, it almost became physical. "Why would he marry me?" Shelby whispered. Diane looked devastated. "I don't know." But Shelby saw it immediately. That tiny flicker. That lie. "You do know." Diane shook her head desperately. "Shelby, tell me." Helen believed Nathaniel genuinely loved you at first. At first. The words landed heavily, but Diane's eyes filled again. But Richard pushed the relationship. Shelby's heartbeat slowed unnaturally. Cold. Everything suddenly felt cold. "Nathaniel pursued me because of my inheritance. We never knew for certain." "You suspected?" "Yes." The room tilted slightly. Shelby grabbed the edge of the dining table to steady herself. Images flashed violently through her mind now. Nathaniel charming her at a charity gala. Nathaniel proposing quickly. Nathaniel insisting on joint financial management after marriage. Nathaniel discouraging her from working full-time. Nathaniel always handling legal paperwork himself. Every memory had changed shape. Every loving gesture suddenly looked strategic. "Oh my God," Shelby whispered. Diane stood quickly. "Helen tried to keep you away from them. She let me marry him. She was sick by then." Shelby blinked. "What?" Diane looked toward the hallway quietly. "She found out about the cancer 3 months before your engagement." Shelby felt something inside her crack open. Her mother had been dying while pretending everything was fine, while Shelby planned weddings and floral arrangements and honeymoon destinations. "She thought Nathaniel would protect you after she was gone," Diane whispered painfully. Shelby laughed bitterly through tears. "That worked out beautifully." Silence swallowed the room. Then Shelby suddenly looked up. "The attic!" Diane froze. That was enough. Shelby moved instantly toward the hallway stairs. "Shelby, you knew there was something up there. Helen didn't want you finding it unless she died." Diane's silence confirmed it. Shelby climbed the narrow attic stairs with shaking legs. Rain hammered softly against the roof overhead, while dust floated through flashlight beams cutting across darkness. The attic smelled like cedar wood and forgotten years. Old furniture, storage boxes, Christmas decorations, and near the far wall, a locked cedar chest. Shelby stopped breathing, because her mother had once pointed to that exact chest when Shelby was little. "Never open this, sweetheart." Shelby suddenly understood why. Diane appeared quietly behind her. She kept everything. Shelby knelt slowly in front of the chest. Her hands trembled so hard she could barely undo the latch. Inside were dozens of files, photographs, hospital bracelets, legal folders, and beneath everything, a pink baby blanket embroidered with the initials C.B. Charlotte Bennett. Shelby touched the fabric carefully, like touching another version of herself. Another life. Another girl. Tears blurred her vision instantly. Diane quietly handed her a folder. Shelby opened it slowly. Birth certificate. Original name, Charlotte Rose Bennett. Mother, Elizabeth Bennett. Father, unknown. Shelby's chest tightened painfully. There it was. Proof, permanent. Official. Real. She flipped to the next document. Emergency guardianship transfer. Temporary identity seal. Protective relocation filing. Then another page. Processed by Richard Washington, Esquire. Shelby froze completely. Not just involved. He handled it personally. Her hands started shaking harder. More pages slid loose onto the attic floor. Photographs. Helen holding baby Shelby. Elizabeth Bennett smiling beside a lake house. Board meeting records. Threat letters. And finally, a sealed envelope addressed in Helen's handwriting. For Charlotte. Only if I fail. Shelby stared at it numbly. Her mother knew this day would come. Diane's voice cracked behind her. She loved you enough to let you hate her. Shelby slowly looked up. I don't hate her. Her voice broke completely. I hate that everyone else lied too. And then she saw it. One final document partially hidden beneath the folders. A non-disclosure agreement, signed by Nathaniel Washington, dated 2 months before their wedding. Shelby stopped breathing entirely, because underneath Nathaniel's signature were 6 words that destroyed the last piece of her heart still trying to defend him. Confidential beneficiary. Charlotte Bennett. Shelby didn't sleep. She sat on the attic floor until sunrise, surrounded by the ruins of her own identity. The cedar chest remained open beside her, like a wound ripped through 34 years of lies. Documents covered the dusty wooden boards around her feet. Birth records, legal filings, threat letters, confidential agreements, and Nathaniel's signature. Every time Shelby looked at it, nausea twisted through her stomach again. Confidential beneficiary, Charlotte Bennett. Not Shelby, not his wife. A beneficiary, an asset, something to manage, something valuable. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the house still felt heavy with storm air when Shelby finally drove back to Connecticut just after dawn. Her wedding ring sat in the cup holder beside her. She couldn't bear wearing it anymore. The mansion appeared at the end of the long driveway, exactly as it always had: perfect stone exterior, immaculate landscaping, towering windows glowing gold in the early morning light. A beautiful prison. Shelby parked slowly. For the first time since marrying Nathaniel, she didn't feel like she was coming home. She felt like she was walking into enemy territory. Nathaniel was waiting in the kitchen. Of course he was. Still dressed in yesterday's white shirt, with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, his tie gone, dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked like a man who had spent all night trying to regain control. The second Shelby entered the room, his gaze dropped immediately to the folders in her hands, and Shelby saw it again. Fear. Real fear. You went through Helen's things, he said quietly. My mother's things. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. Shelby, no. Her voice was calm now. Too calm. I think we're past the point where you get to say my name like nothing happened. Something hardened behind his eyes. Not guilt. Calculation. Nathaniel pulled out a chair carefully. Sit down. Shelby almost laughed. There it was again. That corporate tone, the one he used during difficult negotiations. Like this marriage was just another problem to manage. I'm not your client, she said coldly. Then stop acting irrational. The word hit instantly. Irrational. Shelby stared at him. You knew who I was before we got married. Nathaniel leaned both hands against the kitchen island. It's more complicated than that. Stop saying that. She was trying to protect you. Shelby snapped. Or you? Nathaniel's jaw tightened. For years, Shelby had mistaken his composure for maturity. Now she realized it was control. Nathaniel never lost his temper because angry people revealed too much. Controlled people kept power. You weren't supposed to find out like this, he said, finally. Shelby's chest tightened painfully. Not denial. Never denial. You really did know. Nathaniel rubbed his forehead slowly. My father told me shortly after we started dating. Shelby physically flinched. The confession hurt more than she expected, because suddenly every romantic memory became contaminated. Their first vacation in Martha's Vineyard. Their engagement in Napa. The way he looked at her during their wedding vows. Had all of it been fake? You investigated me, she whispered. It wasn't like that. Then explain it to me. Nathaniel hesitated, and Shelby saw it immediately. He was choosing which version of the truth benefited him most. I fell in love with you before I knew anything about the Bennett estate. Before. Not after. Careful wording. Lawyer wording. Shelby crossed her arms tightly over her chest. But you stayed after you found out. Nathaniel's silence stretched too long. That silence answered everything. Shelby laughed softly in disbelief. Oh my God, it wasn't just about money. Then what was it about? You were vulnerable. The second the words left his mouth, Nathaniel realized his mistake. Shelby saw it instantly. Vulnerable, not loved, not cherished. Vulnerable, like she was easy to shape, easy to influence, easy to own. Something inside Shelby finally cracked completely. You manipulated me. Nathaniel straightened immediately. That's not fair. You married me knowing my entire identity was hidden from me. I protected you. There it is again. Shelby slammed the folder onto the marble countertop hard enough to make him flinch. Everybody keeps using that word, like it excuses what you did. Nathaniel's voice lowered dangerously. You have no idea how ugly the Bennett situation was. Then tell me, you're emotionally overwhelmed right now. Shelby went still. That sentence, that exact sentence. Nathaniel used it every single time she got too close to questioning him. When she asked about missing investment statements, when she wanted separate accounts, when she suggested going back to work full-time. Emotionally overwhelmed. Code for, you're easier to control when you doubt yourself. Shelby slowly removed her wedding ring from the cup holder and placed it on the counter between them. Nathaniel stared at it. Something dark flashed briefly across his face. You're being dramatic. The cruelty of it stunned her. Not because it was loud, because it was casual. 11 years together, her life collapsing, and he still reduced her pain to dramatics. Shelby looked at him carefully. You don't even sound sorry. Nathaniel's composure slipped slightly then. You think this has been easy for me? Shelby almost laughed again. For him? Of course. Everything always became about him eventually. Nathaniel stepped closer. You don't understand the pressure my family was under. Your family? The Bennett board wanted control of the estate. My father kept your identity sealed because people were fighting over guardianship and voting rights. Shelby's pulse pounded. And somehow, you marrying me solved that. It stabilized things. There it was. Not love, strategy, business, stability. Shelby felt sick. You married me because I was convenient. Nathaniel's face hardened instantly. That's not what I said. But it's true. No, he snapped sharply. I married you because you were kind. The sudden anger in his voice startled her. Nathaniel ran a frustrated hand through his hair. You made me feel calm. Shelby stared at him, and for one dangerous second she almost believed him. Then she remembered the document. Confidential beneficiary. Not wife, not partner, beneficiary. The illusion shattered again. Shelby stepped backward. I want access to every trust record connected to my name. Nathaniel immediately went cold. No. The answer came too fast. Too firm. Shelby noticed instantly. Why not? Because this situation is legally sensitive. It's my name. It's complicated corporate litigation. It's my life. Nathaniel's expression darkened. You're not equipped to understand the legal consequences. There it was. The humiliation, the quiet superiority, the constant implication that she was too emotional, too naive, too incapable to survive without him. Shelby suddenly realized Nathaniel had spent years shrinking her carefully. Not enough for anyone else to notice, just enough that she stopped trusting herself. Until now. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her coat pocket. Nathaniel's eyes flickered toward it immediately. Shelby pulled it out. Unknown number, she answered cautiously. Hello. A woman's voice spoke softly. You shouldn't trust your husband. Shelby's blood turned cold. Who is this? I'm trying to help you. Nathaniel stepped closer instantly. Who's on the phone? The woman continued quickly. He's already moving assets. Shelby stopped breathing. What you need to check the Bennett trust accounts before they disappear. The line went dead. Nathaniel reached for the phone immediately. Who was that? Shelby pulled back instinctively. No. Nathaniel's expression changed completely then. Gone was the polished attorney. Gone was the patient husband. Now he looked furious. Actually furious. "Shelby," he said quietly, "you need to stop talking to these people. These people, they are manipulating you. Like you manipulated me." Nathaniel slammed his hand against the marble counter hard enough to make her jump. The sound echoed violently through the kitchen. Both of them froze. Because Nathaniel Washington never lost control. Never. His breathing became dangerously slow. And Shelby realized something terrifying. He wasn't angry she discovered the truth. He was angry because he was losing control over her. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. A text notification lit the screen briefly. "Olivia. Did she find out about us?" Shelby's entire world stopped. Nathaniel grabbed the phone too late, because she had already seen it. The dinner invitation arrived 3 hours later, not from Nathaniel, from his mother. Claire Washington always preferred elegant cruelty over direct confrontation. "Family dinner tonight, 7 p.m. We need unity right now." Unity. Shelby stared at the message while sitting alone in the guest bedroom she had locked herself inside after discovering Olivia's text. Nathaniel had spent the last several hours pretending nothing happened. That almost hurt worse than the cheating itself. No apology, no explanation, just silence. Like if he waited long enough, Shelby would emotionally exhaust herself and return to normal, because that was what she had always done before. Not this time. At exactly 7 o'clock, Shelby walked into the Washington estate, feeling like she was entering a courtroom instead of a family home. The mansion sat along the shoreline in Greenwich, overlooking black water and private docks. Every inch of the property screamed old American wealth. Tall stone columns, iron gates, generational money, the kind of place built to intimidate people before conversations even began. Nathaniel parked the car in silence. Shelby noticed he hadn't tried touching her once during the drive. Not comfort, not affection, nothing. Because Nathaniel only knew how to control emotions, not genuinely respond to them. The front doors opened before they even reached them. Claire Washington stood waiting in a cream silk blouse and diamonds. Shelby suddenly realized probably cost more than her mother's entire house. "Shelby," Claire said softly, air kissing beside her cheek. "You look exhausted. Not grieving. Not heartbroken. Exhausted." Subtle language mattered in this family. Shelby forced a polite smile. "It's been a difficult week." Claire touched her arm delicately. "That's why we're all worried about you." Worried. Another word that actually meant manageable. Shelby stepped inside slowly. The dining room glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. A long mahogany table stretched beneath candlelight and silverware polished so perfectly it reflected light like glass. And seated halfway down the table, Olivia Bennett. Shelby stopped walking. Olivia looked stunning in an understated navy dress with dark hair falling perfectly across one shoulder. She held a wine glass delicately between manicured fingers while speaking quietly with Richard Washington. Like she belonged there. Like she had always belonged there. Nathaniel noticed Shelby freeze. "She's here for legal matters." Shelby turned toward him slowly. "You're insulting my intelligence now." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Richard Washington rose from the table, immediately commanding attention without effort. Even in his late 60s, he carried himself like a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered. "Shelby," he said warmly, "we're glad you came. No one mentioned the affair. No one mentioned Charlotte Bennett. No one mentioned the fact that Shelby's entire life had exploded. The performance had already begun." Shelby sat quietly between Nathaniel and Claire while servants poured wine. Every movement around the table felt rehearsed, controlled, dangerous. Richard folded his napkin neatly onto his lap. "We understand you've recently uncovered some difficult information." Shelby stared at him. "Difficult information. Not the truth." "Yes," she said carefully. Richard nodded sympathetically. Your mother made complicated decisions during unstable times. Shelby noticed it immediately. Your mother. Not Helen, not Elizabeth. No names, no accountability. Just vague language floating around ugly truths. Olivia finally spoke softly from across the table. Helen truly loved you. Shelby's stomach twisted. The nerve of this woman. You knew too, Shelby asked, coldly. Olivia held her gaze calmly. Yes. How long? A long time. Shelby laughed once under her breath. Amazing. Apparently everyone in America knew who she was except her. Claire reached for Shelby's hand. We wanted to tell you eventually. Shelby slowly pulled her hand away when she asked quietly. After I signed more paperwork, after Nathaniel moved more money, the room went still instantly. Nathaniel's voice sharpened. Shelby? No, she snapped. I'm done pretending this family hasn't been manipulating me. Richard leaned back calmly. That's a very serious accusation. Shelby looked directly at him. You sealed my identity. To protect you. There's that word again. Claire's expression hardened slightly for the first time all evening. You're emotional right now. Shelby almost smiled. Of course. Emotional. There it was. The favorite weapon wealthy men and women used against inconvenient women. Nathaniel leaned closer beside her, lowering his voice. You're embarrassing yourself. The sentence hit like a slap. Shelby turned toward him slowly. Excuse me. You're spiraling in front of people trying to help you. Help. Protect. Worried. Every poisonous word wrapped in silk. Shelby suddenly understood something horrifying. This family had spent years shaping reality around her so carefully that she stopped trusting her own instincts. But now, the illusion was cracking. And once cracks appeared, everything ugly underneath became visible. Richard calmly cut into his steak. There are legal complexities surrounding the Bennett estate that you are not equipped to handle emotionally. Shelby stared at him in disbelief. Emotionally. Not intellectually. Emotionally. Like she was a child having a tantrum instead of a woman uncovering fraud. Olivia finally set her wine glass down gently. You need stability right now, Shelby. Shelby's pulse spiked instantly. There it was again. That same word Nathaniel used. Stability. Control. Containment. Shelby looked directly at Olivia. And sleeping with my husband helps create stability. The entire table froze. Claire inhaled sharply. Nathaniel's face darkened instantly. Richard slowly lowered his fork. Olivia, however, barely reacted. That composure alone confirmed everything. Nathaniel spoke through clenched teeth. This isn't the place. No, Shelby said quietly. I think this is exactly the place. Claire looked horrified. Shelby. How long? Shelby asked Olivia directly. Olivia held her gaze calmly, then answered. 3 years. The room disappeared around Shelby for a second. 3 years. 3 years while Shelby planned charity galas beside Nathaniel. 3 years while she cared for her dying mother alone. 3 years while he kissed her goodbye every morning, pretending to be her husband. Nathaniel suddenly stood. That's enough. Shelby looked up at him. No, I'm finally catching up. His expression terrified her then, because all the polished restraint was gone now. Nathaniel looked furious, cornered. Olivia spoke carefully into the silence. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Shelby laughed bitterly. That's what everyone keeps saying. Richard's voice turned cold for the first time. You need to calm yourself before you make catastrophic decisions. Shelby stared at him, and suddenly she understood. This wasn't a family dinner. This was an intervention, a pressure campaign. They brought her here together to make her doubt herself before she discovered more. Shelby slowly pushed back her chair. I'm leaving. Nathaniel grabbed her wrist instantly beneath the table, hard enough to hurt. Just for a second. But Shelby noticed. So did Olivia. Nathaniel loosened his grip immediately when he realized it. "Sit down," he whispered sharply. Shelby looked at his hand on her wrist, then at him, and something inside her finally stopped loving him. Not cracked, not weakened, stopped. Completely. She pulled free slowly. "You know the worst part," she whispered. "It's not even the cheating." Nathaniel's face tightened. "It's realizing all of you looked at me like I was too stupid to notice." Silence swallowed the room. Then Olivia quietly said the one sentence that made Shelby's blood run cold. "You were never supposed to survive this long." Shelby barely remembered driving away from the Washington estate. The roads blurred beneath tears she refused to let fall completely. Her hands shook violently on the steering wheel while Olivia's words echoed endlessly inside her head. "You were never supposed to survive this long. Not discover this. Not fight back. Not become a problem." By the time Shelby parked outside a small brick building in downtown Manhattan the next morning, she hadn't slept in almost 36 hours. The brass plaque beside the door read, "Grace Whitmore and Associates Estate Litigation, Trust Law, Financial Fraud." Shelby stared at it for a long moment, then walked inside. The office surprised her. No marble floors, no intimidating artwork, no cold corporate atmosphere like Washington Legal Group. Instead, warm lighting filled the space alongside shelves overflowing with legal books and framed photographs of women Shelby didn't recognize. Women smiling in courtrooms, women crying while hugging attorneys, women who looked like survivors. A receptionist looked up gently. Mrs. Washington Shelby hesitated. That name suddenly felt wrong in her mouth. "Yes." The receptionist smiled softly. "Ms. Whitmore is expecting you." Expecting. So someone had arranged this. Shelby followed the receptionist down a quiet hallway until she reached a large office overlooking rainy Manhattan streets. Grace Whitmore stood as Shelby entered. She looked to be in her mid-50s with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing. But unlike the Washingtons, Grace didn't study Shelby like an asset. She studied her like a person. Shelby, Grace said gently, "I'm very sorry about Helen." The sincerity nearly broke Shelby instantly, because after days surrounded by manipulation, genuine kindness felt unfamiliar. "Thank you." Grace motioned toward the chair across from her desk. "Sit." Shelby sat carefully, clutching her coat around herself like armor. Grace opened a thick file slowly. "I represented your biological mother briefly before her death." Shelby's stomach tightened. "Elizabeth Bennett." Grace nodded once. "Yes." Hearing the name spoken aloud still felt unreal, like talking about someone from another woman's life. Grace studied Shelby quietly for a moment. "You look exactly like her." Everyone kept saying that. Shelby wasn't sure whether it comforted or haunted her more. Grace folded her hands together. "I'm going to tell you things your husband's family desperately hoped you'd never learn." Shelby's pulse quickened immediately. "What exactly is Bennett Holdings?" Grace exhaled slowly. "A privately controlled investment and real estate empire founded by your grandfather in the 1970s. Shelby blinked. Empire. The word sounded absurd, attached to herself. Grace continued calmly. Commercial properties, medical investments, private equity portfolios, philanthropic foundations. At its height, the Bennett family fortune exceeded $800 million. Shelby physically went still. $800 million. Nathaniel married her, knowing that. Her chest suddenly hurt. Not because of the money, because she finally understood the scale of the lie. Grace slid several documents across the desk. Your biological mother inherited controlling voting shares after your grandfather died. Shelby stared blankly at financial records she barely understood. Elizabeth intended to restructure portions of the company and redirect foundation funds into public healthcare initiatives. Grace's expression darkened slightly. The board hated her for it. Why? Because powerful people dislike losing access to money. Shelby thought instantly of Richard Washington. Grace nodded carefully as if reading her mind. Yes. Richard represented multiple board members during the disputes. Shelby swallowed hard. So he helped hide me. He helped seal your identity after Elizabeth's death. Shelby looked down at her trembling hands. She really died. Because of all this, Grace's silence lasted too long. Officially, Grace said carefully, Elizabeth Bennett died in a single-car accident. Officially. Shelby noticed that word immediately, but Grace leaned back slowly. There were allegations of coercion, financial threats, intimidation. Shelby's stomach twisted violently. You think she was murdered? Grace chose her next words carefully. I think your mother became dangerous to people with power. The office suddenly felt too small. Shelby stood abruptly and walked toward the window, pressing shaky fingers against the glass. Everything kept getting worse. Every answer revealed 10 uglier questions beneath it. Grace spoke gently behind her. Helen took you because Elizabeth asked her to. Shelby closed her eyes. She really loved me. Grace's voice softened, fiercely. Tears finally burned Shelby's eyes. For days she had battled anger toward Helen, but now all she could picture was a terrified woman trying to save a child from powerful predators. She changed my name. She gave you a chance to disappear. Shelby laughed bitterly through tears. Well, that worked out beautifully. Grace remained silent, not defensive, not manipulative, just quiet enough to let Shelby feel angry safely. It almost made Shelby cry harder. After a moment, Grace opened another file. There's something else you need to understand. Shelby turned back slowly. Because your identity remained sealed, the Bennett Trust has been managed through legal proxies for years. Shelby's pulse quickened. What does that mean? It means someone else controlled access to your assets until your identity was legally restored. Shelby already knew the answer before asking. Who, Grace, slid one final document across the desk? Nathaniel Washington, authorized advisory access. Shelby stopped breathing. No. He had access to my trust. Grace's face remained carefully neutral. Yes. How much access? Enough. The word hit like a bullet. Shelby sat down slowly again before her knees gave out. Nathaniel hadn't just lied to her. He had managed her wealth, controlled information, possibly moved assets, all while convincing her she was emotionally incapable of understanding finances. Shelby suddenly remembered every time Nathaniel insisted on handling investments himself, every time he discouraged her from reviewing documents, every joke about her being bad with legal language. Oh my God. Grace watched realization spread across Shelby's face. He manipulated me. Yes. The simple honesty shattered something inside Shelby, because nobody had said it plainly before. Not emotional, not confused, manipulated. Grace opened a small wooden box from her desk drawer. Helen left something with me before she died. Shelby looked up sharply. Grace carefully removed a flash drive. She told me only to give this to you if you discovered the truth. Shelby stared at it. What is it? Grace's expression grew heavier. A recorded confession. Shelby's pulse thundered. She knew she was dying. Grace nodded slowly. And she was terrified Nathaniel Washington would become dangerous if you ever learned who you really were. The room fell completely silent. Then Grace said the sentence that changed everything. You are not just Shelby Washington. Shelby looked up slowly. Grace held her gaze steadily. You are Charlotte Rose Bennett. And legally speaking, Grace continued softly, you may currently be the majority shareholder of Bennett Holdings. Shelby didn't go home after leaving Grace Whitmore's office. Home no longer existed in any place Nathaniel occupied. Instead, she checked into a boutique hotel on the Upper East Side under the name Charlotte Bennett for the first time in her life. The receptionist smiled politely without recognizing the significance of the name. But Shelby felt it. the strange heaviness of it. Charlotte Bennett, a woman she had apparently been born as, a woman everyone else seemed to know better than she did. The hotel suite overlooked Manhattan, glowing beneath cold rain and silver traffic lights. Shelby stood at the window for almost an hour after sunset, replaying Grace's words over and over inside her mind. Majority shareholder, manipulated, dangerous. The flash drive sat untouched on the table behind her. Helen's final confession. Shelby wasn't ready yet, because some part of her still hoped the recording would somehow make all of this smaller, less evil, less deliberate. But deep down, she already knew it wouldn't. Her phone buzzed again. Nathaniel. Call number 23. Shelby declined it immediately. Then another message appeared. Nathaniel, you are making catastrophic decisions based on incomplete information. Shelby stared at the screen. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I love you. Not, please come home. Catastrophic decisions. Like she was a reckless employee, damaging company assets. Shelby suddenly saw their marriage with horrifying clarity. Nathaniel never spoke to her emotionally when control was threatened. Only strategically. Another message appeared instantly. Nathaniel Grace Whitmore is using you. Shelby laughed softly under her breath. Of course, any woman helping her regain power had to be framed as manipulative. That pattern finally became obvious now. Nathaniel isolated problems by destroying Shelby's trust in herself first. Then everyone else second. Slowly, carefully, until she depended on him for reality itself. Not anymore. Shelby opened her laptop. For the first time in years, she began reading financial documents herself. At first, the legal language overwhelmed her. Trust structures, asset transfers, proxy authorizations, shell investment accounts. Nathaniel had always insisted she hated financial conversations. But sitting alone in silence now, Shelby realized something painful. She never hated them. Nathaniel just made her feel stupid every time she asked questions. That realization filled her with sudden rage. Not explosive rage, cold rage. The kind that sharpens people. She opened another file Grace had emailed her. Bennett Trust activity reports. Dozens of transactions appeared across the screen. Some legitimate, some strange. Several accounts redirected through Washington Legal Advisory Services. Shelby frowned, then froze. One recurring authorization appeared over and over again. Temporary asset stabilization fees. Millions of dollars over several years. Shelby's stomach turned. Nathaniel's family had been paying themselves through her trust. She grabbed her phone immediately and photographed everything, then backed up the files to cloud storage, then emailed copies to herself, then printed hard copies downstairs in the business center. Fear had transformed into instinct now. Protect evidence. Protect yourself. Protect reality. By midnight, Shelby sat cross-legged on the hotel bed surrounded by papers and highlighted notes. She barely recognized herself, but for the first time in years, she trusted herself. Her phone buzzed again. Olivia. Shelby stared at the name for several seconds before answering. What? Olivia's voice remained calm. You need to stop digging. Shelby nearly laughed. That line is getting repetitive. I'm serious. So am I. Silence stretched between them. Then Olivia sighed softly. You think Nathaniel is the villain here because it's emotionally easier. Shelby's pulse quickened instantly. What does that mean? It means you don't understand how dangerous this situation actually is. There it is again, Shelby whispered bitterly. Everyone treating me like a child. Olivia lowered her voice carefully. Richard Washington protected you. Shelby laughed outright this time. He stole from me. He kept you alive. Shelby's expression hardened instantly. That's not the same thing. No, Olivia admitted quietly. It isn't. The honesty startled Shelby enough to remain silent. Olivia continued softly. Your biological mother threatened powerful people before she died. There were investors involved, political donors, board members with connections you can't imagine. Shelby looked down at the documents spread across the bed. And Nathaniel married me to keep control. Olivia hesitated. That hesitation answered enough. Shelby closed her eyes briefly. Oh my God. It became real eventually, Olivia whispered. Pain sliced sharply through Shelby's chest. Because that hurt most. Not knowing whether Nathaniel ever genuinely loved her, or whether she was simply an assignment that became convenient. You slept with my husband. Yes. How long you already know? Shelby swallowed hard. 3 years. Olivia spoke again. He's losing control now. That makes him unpredictable. Shelby's eyes narrowed immediately. Are you warning me? Yes. Why silence? Then finally, because Helen was kind to me once. That answer stunned Shelby completely. Before she could respond, Olivia continued quickly. There's something else you need to know. Shelby's pulse spiked. Nathaniel's father had psychological evaluations prepared on you. Everything inside Shelby went still. What? In case the truth ever surfaced. Shelby couldn't breathe for a second. No. Yes. Olivia's voice softened, almost regretfully. The plan was to portray you as emotionally unstable from grief and paranoia. Shelby remembered every word from the Washington family dinner. Emotional, spiraling, overwhelmed, stability. Her blood ran cold. They were setting me up. Yes. Shelby stood abruptly from the bed. Her entire body shook now. Not from fear anymore. From fury. You knew about this, I knew enough. And you stayed. Olivia's silence felt ugly, cowardly, complicit. Shelby finally whispered, You're just as bad as they are. Olivia didn't argue, because she couldn't. The line disconnected. Shelby stood motionless in the center of the hotel room, while Manhattan lights flickered outside the windows like distant fires. Then slowly, very slowly, she walked toward the flash drive Helen left behind. Her hands trembled as she inserted it into the laptop. One video file appeared. Helen_final_message.mov. Shelby clicked play. Static flickered briefly across the screen. Then Helen appeared. Older, thinner, sick, but unmistakably her mother. Shelby's breath shattered instantly. Helen looked directly into the camera with exhausted eyes full of love and terror. If you're watching this, she whispered weakly, then I failed to protect you long enough. Shelby pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. Helen coughed painfully before continuing. Your name is Charlotte Rose Bennett, but if you've lived long enough to become Shelby too, keep that name somewhere in your heart. Shelby broke completely then. Tears streamed silently down her face. Helen smiled sadly through visible pain. I wanted you to grow up loved instead of hunted. Hunted, not hidden. Hunted. Helen's eyes filled with tears. Richard Washington promised he would keep your identity sealed. I believed him at first. Shelby stopped breathing. At first. Helen continued shakily, but Nathaniel. The video crackled softly, and Helen whispered the sentence that made Shelby's blood freeze. If Nathaniel discovers who you really are, he will never let you belong to yourself again. Shelby replayed Helen's recording 4 times before sunrise. Each time, different words cut deeper. He will never let you belong to yourself again. Not hurt you, not leave you, own you. The realization sat like poison in Shelby's chest, while pale morning light slowly crept across the hotel suite. For years, she had mistaken dependence for love. Nathaniel handled finances because he was better at it. Nathaniel reviewed contracts because he was protective. Nathaniel discouraged conflict because he wanted peace. No. Nathaniel controlled information because informed women were harder to manipulate. Shelby finally understood that now. Her laptop screen glowed with trust documents and transaction histories spread across the bed beside her. Empty coffee cups lined the nightstand. She had not slept, but exhaustion no longer made her feel weak. It made her feel dangerous. Her phone vibrated at 7:13 a.m. Grace Whitmore. Shelby answered immediately. "Tell me you found something." Grace's voice sounded unusually tense. "I need you to come to my office." Shelby sat upright instantly. "Why?" "Because what I found is worse than financial fraud." A cold chill moved down Shelby's spine. 40 minutes later, she walked quickly into Grace's office carrying 2 binders full of copied records. Grace shut the office door immediately behind her. No receptionist greeting, no small talk, only tension. Shelby's pulse quickened. "What happened?" Grace placed a thick manila folder onto the desk carefully. "I had my forensic accountant review several trust disbursements connected to your estate." Shelby sat slowly, and Grace looked directly at her. "There's evidence someone was preparing a conservatorship petition." Shelby stopped breathing. What Grace opened the folder. Psychological evaluations, draft court filings, medical concerns. Shelby's vision blurred as she scanned the documents. Subject exhibits paranoid thought patterns following family loss. Subject displays emotional instability. Subject may require temporary financial guardianship. Her hands began shaking violently. "No." Grace slid another page toward her. Signed, Consultation Authorization, Nathaniel Washington. Shelby physically recoiled. He had already started the process, before she even discovered the truth. "Oh my God." Grace's expression remained grim. This wasn't random preparation. This was strategic. Shelby couldn't process the words fast enough. "He wanted to declare me mentally unstable." Yes. "So he could control the trust." Yes. The simplicity of Grace's honesty almost made Shelby cry. No minimizing, no softening, just truth. Shelby stared blankly at the paperwork. "This is insane." Grace leaned forward carefully. "No, it's calculated." Shelby suddenly remembered every moment from the past year. Nathaniel asking if she forgot things. Nathaniel suggesting therapy repeatedly. Nathaniel subtly mentioning stress in front of friends. Nathaniel encouraging her to rest instead of returning to work. A pattern. A setup. Her stomach twisted violently. He was building a narrative. Grace nodded once, and likely documenting reactions. Shelby pressed trembling fingers against her temple. Every emotional moment in her marriage suddenly felt weaponized. Even grief. Especially grief. Can he still do this? Grace shook her head slowly. Not if we move first. We. The word landed differently now, because Grace never spoke like Shelby was helpless. She spoke like Shelby was involved in saving herself. What do we do? Grace opened another folder. We establish legal control of your identity and freeze trust movement immediately. Shelby blinked. Can we? Yes, but once we do this becomes open warfare. Shelby almost laughed. War. That was exactly what this felt like now. Not a marriage collapsing. A power struggle revealing itself. Grace slid over another document. Your biological identity restoration paperwork. Shelby stared at the name printed across the top. Charlotte Rose Bennett. For a second, the room became strangely quiet. That name still felt like looking into a mirror that belonged to someone else. Grace watched her carefully. You don't have to abandon Shelby. Shelby looked up. Grace's voice softened slightly. Helen raised Shelby Washington. Elizabeth gave birth to Charlotte Bennett. Both women are part of you. The kindness in that sentence nearly undid her, because everyone else kept trying to define her, own her, rename her, control her. But Grace spoke like Shelby belonged to herself. A knock interrupted the moment. The receptionist opened the door nervously. "Ms. Whitmore, there are federal investigators here asking for you." Shelby's pulse spiked instantly. Grace's expression sharpened. "Send them in." Two people entered the office. A woman in a navy pantsuit and a man carrying a leather briefcase. FBI. Shelby's stomach dropped. The female investigator introduced herself calmly. "Agent Dana Reeves." Grace stood immediately. "I wasn't expecting escalation this quickly." Escalation. Shelby hated how quickly legal language was becoming normal now. Agent Reeves turned toward Shelby. "Mrs. Washington," Shelby interrupted automatically. "It's Shelby. Not Nathaniel's last name. Not Bennett. Just Shelby. For now." Agent Reeves nodded respectfully. "We've been reviewing financial irregularities tied to Bennett Holdings and Washington Legal Group." Shelby's chest tightened. "How serious?" The male investigator opened the briefcase. "Potential embezzlement. Fraud. Fiduciary abuse." Shelby went completely still. Nathaniel really stole from her. Not emotionally. Legally. Financially. Systematically. Agent Reeves continued carefully. "We believe several trust accounts were used to move funds through advisory fees and shell entities." Grace folded her arms. "We suspected as much." Shelby looked between them numbly. "How long has this been happening?" "Years. Years." While Nathaniel kissed her goodbye every morning, while he held her hand at charity galas, while he slept beside her every night. Years. The betrayal became so large, Shelby almost stopped feeling it entirely. Like pain exceeding the body's ability to process it. Agent Reeves slid a photograph across the desk. Nathaniel entering a Manhattan hotel with Olivia Bennett. Date stamped. Repeated visits. Shelby looked away immediately. Oddly, the affair hurt less now. Compared to everything else, cheating almost felt small. Agent Reeves studied Shelby carefully. "We also uncovered communication referencing psychiatric containment strategies." Grace's eyes narrowed sharply. "The conservatorship?" "Yes." Shelby suddenly felt sick. Not because she was surprised anymore, because she realized how close they came. If Helen hadn't spoken before dying, if Shelby ignored the bracelet, if Eleanor never approached her at the funeral, she would still be trapped, still doubting herself, still sleeping beside the man preparing to legally own her life. Shelby stood abruptly and walked toward the window. Rain streaked across Manhattan below. People moved through crosswalks carrying coffee and umbrellas, completely unaware her entire existence had detonated in less than a week. Agent Reeves spoke gently behind her. "We may need your cooperation moving forward." Shelby laughed bitterly. "You already have it." Grace stepped closer, carefully. "There's one more thing." Shelby turned slowly. Grace held up a printed email. "We intercepted communications sent late last night from Nathaniel to Richard Washington." Shelby's stomach tightened immediately. "What does it say?" Grace hesitated, then read aloud. "She's becoming harder to contain than expected." The room went silent. Contain. Not protect. Not help. Contain. Like Shelby was never a wife to them. Just a problem that escaped control. Shelby closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. Calm, cold, resolved. For the first time since Helen died, her voice didn't shake when she spoke. "Set up the board meeting." Grace blinked once. Shelby held her gaze steadily. "If Nathaniel wants a war," she said quietly, "I'm done surviving it." The Bennett Holdings boardroom occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Manhattan. Everything about the space was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, black marble floors, a conference table long enough to separate powerful people from consequences. Shelby stood outside the double doors at exactly 8:57 a.m., staring at her reflection in the dark glass. For the first time in years, she looked like someone she recognized. Not because of the tailored black suit Grace helped her choose. Not because of the sharp makeup or the controlled expression. Because the fear was finally gone. In its place stood something colder. Clarity. Grace adjusted the folder beneath her arm beside Shelby. "You ready?" Shelby exhaled slowly. "No." Grace almost smiled. "Good. Terrified people make fewer careless mistakes." That unexpected honesty grounded Shelby more than reassurance would have. At the far end of the hallway, the elevator doors opened. Nathaniel stepped out. Their eyes met instantly. Shelby's stomach twisted painfully despite everything. Because once upon a time, seeing him walk toward her used to make her feel safe. Now it felt like watching a storm approach. Nathaniel slowed when he saw Grace standing beside her. Then his gaze moved to Shelby fully, and for one brief second, he looked shaken. Not because of the board meeting, because Shelby no longer looked controllable. The difference unsettled him immediately. "You look tired," Nathaniel said quietly as he approached. Shelby almost laughed. That used to work on her, tiny comments disguised as concern. Subtle reminders that she looked fragile, emotional, weak. Not today. "You look nervous," Shelby replied calmly. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Grace stepped slightly forward. "Counsel." Nathaniel barely acknowledged her. His focus remained locked on Shelby. "We don't need to do this publicly." Shelby held his gaze steadily. "You should have thought about that before preparing psychiatric evaluations on your wife." A flicker crossed Nathaniel's face. Not guilt. Annoyance. Like he was frustrated she discovered the plan too early. "You don't understand what those documents were." Shelby tilted her head slightly. "Containment strategies." Nathaniel went still, so he knew she saw the email. Good. For the first time since this nightmare began, Shelby wanted him uncomfortable. The boardroom doors opened. A junior assistant nodded nervously. "They're ready." Nathaniel lowered his voice immediately. "Once you walk in there, everything changes." Shelby looked directly into his eyes. It already did. Then she walked past him. The room fell silent the moment she entered. 12 board members sat around the massive conference table. Expensive suits, controlled expressions, carefully hidden panic. Some recognized Shelby as Nathaniel's wife. Others recognized her immediately as Elizabeth Bennett's daughter. No one knew which version of her would walk into that room today. Good. Shelby took the empty chair at the head of the table. Nathaniel noticed immediately. "That seat belongs to acting counsel." Grace calmly placed several folders down beside Shelby. Not anymore. Murmurs spread quietly around the room. Richard Washington sat near the far end of the table, expression unreadable. Beside him sat Olivia. Perfect posture, perfect makeup, perfectly composed. Shelby almost admired the discipline it took for Olivia to sit there after sleeping with her husband for 3 years. Almost. Richard folded his hands calmly. "Before we begin this circus—" "No," Shelby interrupted softly. The room froze, because apparently nobody interrupted Richard Washington. Ever. Shelby leaned forward slightly. "My name is Shelby Charlotte Bennett." Silence deepened instantly. Not Washington. Bennett. The shift mattered. "I am here today." Shelby continued calmly as the surviving biological heir of Elizabeth Bennett and legal beneficiary of the Bennett Family Trust. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Several board members exchanged alarmed looks. Richard spoke carefully. "These matters remain under legal review." Grace slid official documentation across the table. "Identity restoration has already been filed." One board member grabbed the paperwork quickly. Another began whispering under his breath. Shelby watched panic begin spreading carefully around the room. Good. Let them feel uncertain for once. Nathaniel finally stood. "This meeting is premature and emotionally irresponsible." There it was. Emotionally. Shelby smiled faintly. You really love that word. Nathaniel ignored the comment. My wife recently lost her mother. She is vulnerable to manipulation from opportunistic parties attempting to exploit family tragedy. Shelby almost admired the performance. Calm voice, measured concern, the perfect image of a protective husband. If she didn't know the truth, she might have believed him herself. Grace calmly connected a flash drive to the presentation screen. Before Mr. Washington continues, she said evenly, "We believe the board deserves full transparency." Nathaniel's eyes darkened immediately. Grace. Too late. The first document appeared on screen. Trust advisory payments authorized by Nathaniel Washington. Millions of dollars. Room by room. Year by year. The silence turned dangerous. One older board member adjusted his glasses nervously. Richard remained perfectly still. Shelby noticed. Of course he wasn't surprised. Nathaniel's voice sharpened. Those payments were legally authorized. Grace nodded once, using concealed beneficiary structures hidden from the legal heir herself. Another document appeared. Psychological stability consultation. Shelby heard quiet murmuring immediately. Nathaniel's composure finally cracked slightly. These documents were precautionary. Against your grieving wife, Shelby asked softly. Nathaniel turned toward her sharply. You were becoming unstable. There it was. Publicly now. The room went still. Shelby rose slowly from her chair. You know what's interesting, she said calmly. For years, Nathaniel convinced me I was emotionally incapable of understanding finances. She looked around the room. Turns out, I was just married to a man terrified I'd start reading documents myself. Several people looked away immediately. Because they knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Olivia finally spoke softly from across the table. This isn't helping anyone. Shelby turned toward her. No, she agreed quietly. Sleeping with my husband probably complicated things too. Gasps rippled softly through the room. Nathaniel slammed his hand against the table. Enough! Shelby didn't flinch. Not anymore. Olivia's calm facade finally fractured. Richard stood slowly. This meeting is adjourned. No, Shelby said. The authority in her voice surprised even her. Richard stared at her coldly. You are out of your depth. Shelby walked toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. The city stretched endlessly below them. Power, money. Men like Richard Washington built entire lives believing women were easier to control than respect. Shelby slowly turned back toward the room. Then Grace handed her one final document. Majority voting share transfer, Elizabeth Bennett's original holdings, legally restored. Shelby looked directly at the board, then signed her name carefully. Not Shelby Washington, not Charlotte Bennett, Shelby Charlotte Bennett. The room went dead silent, because with one signature, the balance of power changed completely. Shelby set the pen down gently, then finally said the sentence Nathaniel feared most. Now, she said softly, let's discuss who's been stealing from this company. Nobody spoke for almost 5 full seconds after Shelby signed the document. The silence inside the boardroom became thick enough to choke on. Nathaniel stood motionless beside the conference table, one hand still pressed flat against the polished black surface where he had slammed it moments earlier. His expression had gone frighteningly blank. Not calm, blank, like his mind was recalculating faster than his emotions could keep up. Richard Washington recovered first. Of course he did. Men like Richard survived by adapting before panic became visible. This meeting, Richard said smoothly, has devolved into emotional theater. Shelby almost smiled. There it was again. Emotional. The word had followed her like a prison for years. But now she understood something important. Men only called women emotional when they were losing control of them. Grace Whitmore remained standing beside the screen. Actually, Grace said calmly, what's happening here is evidence presentation. Another file appeared on screen. internal transfer records, shell entities, advisory fee structures, offshore holding accounts. The room shifted visibly now. Several board members leaned forward sharply. Others stopped pretending not to care. Nathaniel's voice cut through the silence instantly. These records are being intentionally misrepresented. Grace clicked another slide. This time, emails appeared. Internal communications. Nathaniel's name. Richard's name. Olivia's name. Shelby watched Olivia's composure finally begin cracking around the edges. Good. One board member adjusted his tie nervously. What exactly are we looking at here? Grace answered without hesitation. Evidence of concealed trust extraction tied to the legal suppression of the Bennett heir's identity. The phrase hit the room like broken glass. Heir. Not Nathaniel's wife. Not unstable widow. Heir. Shelby stood slowly from her chair again. For 11 years, she said calmly, I was told I wasn't capable of understanding financial structures. Nathaniel's jaw tightened visibly. Shelby continued, I was discouraged from reviewing trust documents, discouraged from working independently, discouraged from asking questions. She looked directly at the board. Now I know why. Richard folded his hands together. You're making accusations you cannot legally prove. Grace slid another document forward immediately. Forensic accounting reports say otherwise. One older board member grabbed the report quickly. Shelby watched the color drain slowly from his face as he read. How much money are we talking about? Another member whispered. Grace answered flatly. Several $1 million over multiple years. The room erupted instantly. Questions overlapping, arguments starting. Nathaniel stepped forward sharply. This is nonsense. No, Shelby said quietly. This is math. Nathaniel turned toward her fully then. For the first time since their marriage began unraveling, Shelby saw genuine hatred flicker across his face. Not frustration, hatred. Because she was no longer behaving like the version of Shelby he created. The obedient version, the dependent version, the smaller version. Nathaniel lowered his voice dangerously. You have no idea what you're doing. Shelby held his gaze steadily. No, you just never thought I'd learn. That hit him. Hard. Richard suddenly stood. We are done here. Then the boardroom doors opened. Everyone turned instantly. 2 federal agents entered first. Then 3 more. Dark suits. Badges visible. Silence crashed through the room. Agent Dana Reeves stepped forward calmly. Richard Washington. Nathaniel Washington. We need both of you to remain present. The entire boardroom froze. One woman near the end of the table whispered, Jesus Christ. Nathaniel looked stunned for the first time all morning. Not performatively shocked. Actually shocked. Shelby realized immediately. He thought he still had time. Time to manipulate her. Time to isolate her. Time to regain control. But the timeline had moved faster than he expected. Agent Reeves placed a folder onto the conference table. We are formally opening an investigation into fiduciary fraud, financial concealment, and unlawful trust diversion related to Bennett Holdings. Richard's expression finally hardened. You're making a serious mistake. Agent Reeves barely blinked. No. We believe you did. Nathaniel stepped forward immediately. My wife is emotionally compromised and being influenced by opportunistic counsel. Shelby almost laughed. Even now, while federal agents stood inside the room, he still tried framing her as unstable. Agent Reeves looked directly at Shelby. Mrs. Bennett, do you feel coerced into participating in this investigation? The room went still again. Shelby looked at Nathaniel. At the man she once loved enough to build an entire life around. The man who kissed her forehead while secretly preparing conservatorship paperwork. The man who told her she was too emotional to manage finances while stealing from her trust. The man who cheated on her while she cared for her dying mother. Something strange happened then. The pain remained, but the love finally disappeared completely. like a light shutting off forever. Shelby turned calmly toward Agent Reeves. No. Nathaniel's face changed instantly. Not heartbreak, panic. Real panic. Because for the first time since he met her, Shelby wasn't protecting him anymore. Olivia suddenly stood abruptly from her chair. This isn't all, Nathaniel. The room snapped toward her immediately. Nathaniel looked genuinely stunned. Olivia. She ignored him completely. There were board members involved, advisors, outside pressure. Richard's voice turned lethal. Sit down. Olivia looked terrified now. Good. Shelby wanted every single one of them terrified. You said we'd never actually hurt her, Olivia whispered shakily toward Nathaniel. Shelby stopped breathing. Never actually hurt her. Nathaniel looked furious. Stop talking! But Olivia kept going. She wasn't supposed to find the records this early. The room exploded again. Board members speaking over each other. Questions. Denials. Panic spreading everywhere. And suddenly, Shelby understood something powerful. The Washingtons controlled people through silence. Once people started talking, everything collapsed. Richard pointed sharply toward Olivia. You are making reckless statements. Olivia laughed bitterly. Reckless, she snapped. You prepared psychiatric reports on her. Several board members physically recoiled. One older man stood abruptly. You told us she was unstable. Shelby stared at Richard coldly. There it was, the narrative, already spreading quietly behind closed doors. Richard had been planting it for years. Nathaniel suddenly moved toward Shelby. Fast. Agent Reeves stepped between them instantly. Nathaniel stopped short. Shelby noticed something terrifying then. He looked desperate. Not remorseful. Desperate. Like a man watching ownership slip through his fingers. Shelby, he said quietly, please. The softness in his voice almost sounded real. Almost. You know me. Shelby looked directly at him. No, she whispered. I know the version of you that needed me small. Nathaniel flinched like she struck him. Good. For years, he made her doubt her own reality. Now he could sit inside the truth instead. Federal agents began speaking quietly with Grace near the doorway, while assistants rushed nervously through the hallway outside. News was spreading already. Scandal traveled fast in Manhattan. Nathaniel's perfect image was cracking publicly now. And men like Nathaniel valued reputation almost more than oxygen. Richard suddenly pressed a hand against the edge of the conference table. His face had gone pale. One board member stepped forward quickly. Richard. The older man's breathing became uneven. Shelby watched coldly as panic spread across the room again. For decades, Richard Washington controlled everyone around him through fear and influence. Now he looked old, fragile, human. Nathaniel immediately moved toward his father. Dad, Agent Reeves, intercepted smoothly. You need to remain available for questioning. Nathaniel turned sharply. You can't seriously be doing this right now. Shelby finally sat down slowly at the head of the table again. Her chair now, her name now, her life now. And as chaos swallowed the room around her, Shelby realized something almost unbelievable. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of them anymore. The hallway outside the boardroom felt different now. Not quieter, not calmer, just exposed. Like the building itself had lost the illusion of control it had carried for decades. Nathaniel Washington stood near the glass wall at the end of the corridor, one hand pressed against the cold surface, breathing like a man trying not to collapse in public. Behind him, federal agents moved in coordinated silence. Doors opened, phones rang. Board members were escorted out one by one for questioning. Everything he had built his identity on reputation control authority was unraveling in real time. And Shelby Washington was at the center of it. No, not Shelby anymore. He turned slowly. She was standing at the end of the hallway with Grace Whitmore beside her, calm in a way that made Nathaniel's chest tighten painfully. Shelby Charlotte Bennett. The name still didn't feel real when he heard it in his own mind. Like reality had split into two versions of her, one he controlled and one he no longer understood. Grace stepped aside, leaving them alone. A mistake, Nathaniel thought immediately. Or maybe not. Shelby didn't move toward him. That was the first thing that hurt. She used to always move toward him, even during arguments, even during silence, even when she was hurt. Now she stood still. Like distance was the only language she trusted. "You did this fast," Nathaniel said quietly. Shelby's expression didn't change. "You did it over years." That answer silenced him. Because it was true. Nathaniel swallowed hard. "You don't understand what happens next." Shelby tilted her head slightly. "Explain it to me then." The challenge in her voice was new, not emotional, not uncertain, controlled. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, trying to regain footing. "This doesn't end with board votes or filings. There are political connections, financial stakeholders." "Stop," Shelby interrupted. Just one word. But it hit harder than anything else. Nathaniel stopped talking. Shelby stepped forward slightly now, just enough to shrink the distance between them. "I spent 11 years being told I didn't understand things," she said quietly. "Finances, law, emotion, myself." Her voice remained steady, but something underneath it was burning. "And every time I asked questions, you made me feel stupid for asking." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "That's not what I—" "It is," she cut in sharply. "Silence, the kind that reveals everything." Shelby continued. "You didn't just lie to me, Nathaniel. You curated me." That word landed differently. Curated. Like art. Like property. Like something shaped for display. Nathaniel shook his head slightly. "I was protecting you." There it was again. Shelby almost smiled. That word used to work on her. Now it sounded like manipulation wearing a soft coat. From what she asked. Nathaniel hesitated. That hesitation answered more than words ever could. Shelby nodded slowly. "From yourself?" "No," he said quickly. "From people who would have used you." Her eyes sharpened. "Like you?" Nathaniel went still. That question hit too close, too precise, too honest. For the first time, Nathaniel realized something uncomfortable. She wasn't confused anymore. She wasn't reacting emotionally. She was dissecting him, carefully, accurately. Shelby looked past him for a moment toward the glass windows overlooking Manhattan. The city looked unchanged. People still moved. Cars still drove. Life still functioned. Her entire world had collapsed, but the world didn't pause for it. That realization made her strangely calm. "You had access to my trust," she said quietly. Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. That silence again. Shelby turned back to him slowly. "How much did you take?" His eyes flickered. "There were advisory fees." "Don't minimize it," she said sharply. The tone surprised him. It wasn't loud. It was final. Nathaniel inhaled slowly. Some transfers were made to stabilize company exposure during legal disputes. Shelby laughed once under her breath. "Translate that into English." His face tightened. "You want everything simplified." "No," she said softly. "I want the truth unfiltered." That line made something shift in him. Because Nathaniel had always controlled language to control outcomes. But Shelby was no longer accepting the version he packaged. He exhaled slowly. "Money moved through Washington legal group accounts," he admitted. Shelby nodded. "How much?" He hesitated again. "Over the years, approximately 12 million. The number didn't shock her the way it should have. It just confirmed what she already felt in her bones. She had never been just a wife. She had been an asset pipeline. Shelby looked at him for a long moment, and Olivia Nathaniel's expression changed instantly. That name mattered differently. Shelby saw it. "You slept with her for 3 years," she said calmly. "It wasn't—" Don't, she interrupted again. A pause. Then Shelby added quietly, don't insult me by rewriting that too. Nathaniel looked down briefly. For the first time, he looked tired. Not strategic, not composed, just tired. She got involved before I knew how complicated everything would become, he said finally. Shelby studied him carefully. That was not denial. That was justification. A dangerous difference. You always speak like consequences are accidents, she said softly. Nathaniel looked up. Shelby continued, but you plan everything else. Silence, that silence again. Shelby nodded slowly. I see it now. Nathaniel's voice lowered. See what? She looked directly at him. How you turn people into systems, she said quietly. How you turn relationships into structure. How you turn me into something manageable. His jaw tightened. That's not what happened. It is, she said simply. Then softer. It always was. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Grace Whitmore returned with a federal agent behind her. We're moving forward with formal asset protection measures, Grace said. Nathaniel's head snapped toward her. Asset protection, Grace didn't flinch. Given the ongoing investigation, control of contested accounts will be temporarily reassigned. Nathaniel's face darkened instantly. No. Shelby turned slightly toward Grace. How long Grace met her eyes. Immediately. That word changed everything. Nathaniel took a step forward. You can't just strip authority without due process. The agent behind Grace spoke calmly. There is due process. It's happening now. Nathaniel's breathing became sharper. Shelby noticed. For the first time, Nathaniel was losing procedural control. Not emotional control. Structural control. That was worse. Much worse. Shelby looked at him again. You're scared, she said quietly. His eyes flickered. No. But it wasn't convincing anymore. Because she could see it now. The cracks. The urgency beneath the composure. The realization that the system he relied on was no longer responding the way it used to. Shelby stepped closer one final time. You spent years teaching me I was unstable, she said softly. Nathaniel didn't respond. And now she continued. You're the one who doesn't know what happens next. That landed. He looked at her fully then. Really looked. And for a second, something human surfaced beneath everything. Not love, not apology, recognition, like he was finally seeing her as separate from the version he built. Shelby held his gaze without blinking. I'm not yours anymore, she said. The words weren't dramatic. They were factual. Nathaniel's throat tightened slightly. Shelby. She shook her head once. No, just that. Then she turned away. Not quickly, not angrily. Just decisively. And that was what hurt him most. Because Nathaniel Washington had always believed he could eventually regain control of any situation. But as Shelby walked down the hallway beside Grace Whitmore and the federal agent, he realized something he had never prepared for. She wasn't coming back. Not emotionally, not legally, not in any version of their story anymore. And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel stood completely still while someone else took the future from him. Nathaniel didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his penthouse office, surrounded by glass walls that once made him feel untouchable. Manhattan shimmered below him like a living circuit board, bright, indifferent, unstoppable. But for the first time in his career, Nathaniel Washington felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Loss. Not the legal kind, not the strategic kind. Real loss. His phone lay face down on the desk. He hadn't touched it in hours, but he knew what was waiting there. Messages from board members distancing themselves, emails from partners requesting clarification, and Olivia's final message unread. You let her see too much. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Too much. That was the problem. Shelby was never supposed to see all of it. She was supposed to stay within the structure he built for her. Safe, contained, predictable. He pressed his fingers against his forehead, exhaling slowly, and for the first time, he couldn't tell if he was thinking like a lawyer or a man losing his wife. At the same time across Manhattan, Shelby sat in Grace Whitmore's office again, but everything felt different now. The office wasn't just a place of information anymore. It was a place of transition, a place where her old life ended without ceremony. Grace placed a final folder in front of her. "This is everything we've recovered so far," she said quietly. "There will be more." Shelby didn't open it immediately. Instead, she studied her own hands. They looked the same, but they didn't feel the same. "I keep thinking about how long this was happening," Shelby said softly. Grace didn't interrupt. Shelby continued. "Years of decisions I thought I made weren't really mine." Her voice tightened slightly, and I didn't even know. That was the part that still hurt the most. Not betrayal, not even Nathaniel, but how easy it had been for them to shape her reality. Grace leaned forward slightly. "That doesn't make you weak." Shelby gave a faint, tired smile. "It makes me easy to erase." "No," Grace said firmly. "It makes you unprotected." The correction landed differently. Shelby finally opened the folder. Inside were more financial records, more legal trails, but one page made her pause. A memo marked Emergency Legal Containment Strategy, Washington Legal Group. Her stomach tightened instantly. Containment. Again. She read further. Objective, established narrative of emotional instability following maternal bereavement. Outcome. Temporary conservatorship over financial decision-making. Shelby stopped breathing for a moment. It was worse when it was written down like a business plan. Cold. Clinical. Structured. She looked up at Grace. "They plan to take my life from me legally." Grace nodded once. "Yes." Shelby leaned back slowly in her chair, and for a second, she didn't feel anger. She felt something heavier. Grief. Not for Nathaniel, not for her mother, for the version of herself that trusted people who were already organizing her disappearance. The next morning, Shelby arrived at the federal building. This time, she wasn't escorted. She walked in on her own. Grace was already inside the meeting room with Agent Reeves and two financial analysts. Nathaniel arrived 5 minutes later. He paused when he saw her, not because she was there, but because she didn't react to him at all. No hesitation, no emotional pull, no reflex. That bothered him more than hostility, because indifference meant finality. Agent Reeves began immediately. "We've traced multiple trust transactions tied to Bennett Holdings accounts." She slid a series of documents forward. Funds were moved through advisory fees, then redirected through affiliated legal structures. One analyst pointed at the screen. "Washington Legal Group appears in over 70% of flagged transactions." Nathaniel's expression tightened. Shelby watched him carefully now, not as a wife, as a witness. Grace spoke next. "We're also reviewing attempted conservatorship filings prepared, but never executed." Nathaniel finally spoke. "Those filings were never submitted." Agent Reeves looked up. "That doesn't change intent." Silence. Shelby's voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "Why didn't you finish it?" Nathaniel turned toward her slowly. There it was again. Her tone, no emotion, just analysis. He hesitated, then answered. "Because it escalated faster than expected." Shelby nodded slightly. "That's honest." The word surprised him. Honest wasn't something he expected from her anymore. She continued. "You didn't think I'd get access to my identity." "No." "You didn't think I'd believe it." Nathaniel didn't answer. Shelby looked down at the documents, "And you didn't think I'd survive it." That statement hung in the air longer than anything else in the room. Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. "That's not true." Shelby looked up at him. For the first time that day, something flickered in her expression. Not pain. Understanding. "You don't know what I am anymore," she said quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a boundary. Nathaniel went still, because she was right. He didn't. Later that evening, Shelby stood outside Helen's grave. The cemetery was quiet, hidden beneath early autumn wind. Leaves shifted softly across stone pathways. Shelby placed a single white flower on the grave. She didn't cry immediately. She just stood there. "I know you tried," she whispered. The wind moved gently through the trees, as if listening. Shelby exhaled slowly. "I don't hate you anymore." A pause. "I understand now." Her voice softened. "You were trying to save me from people like him." Another silence. Then she added quietly, "But I still wish you had told me the truth before it broke everything apart." She sat down slowly on the grass beside the grave. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't running. Not from Nathaniel, not from Olivia, not from the truth, just sitting with it. Across the city, Nathaniel stood in his office again. But something had changed. The view still looked the same. The city still moved. But nothing inside him felt stable anymore. He opened a file on his desk. Shelby's signature. Charlotte Rose Bennett. Legally recognized. Officially restored. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly closed the folder. His assistant knocked softly. "There's a call from Olivia Bennett." Nathaniel didn't move. After a moment, he said flatly, "I'm done." The assistant hesitated. Sir Nathaniel finally looked up. Not angry, not controlled, just finished. "I said I'm done." A pause. Then softer, with all of it. He turned off the phone. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel Washington wasn't managing a situation. He was living inside the consequences of one. That night, Shelby returned to Grace's office one last time. Not as a client, not as a victim, as something else. Grace looked up as she entered. "You didn't have to come." Shelby nodded slightly. "I know." She placed a folder on the desk. "What is this?" Grace asked. Shelby met her eyes. "My next step." Grace opened it carefully. Inside were foundation plans, legal structuring, women's advocacy funding, protection networks for financial abuse survivors. Grace looked up slowly. "You're building something." Shelby nodded once. "Yes." A pause. Then softly, "Something they can't take from me." Grace studied her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Good." Shelby turned toward the window. Manhattan lights stretched endlessly outside. No longer overwhelming, just real. She exhaled slowly. For the first time, her name didn't feel like something stolen, or given, or hidden. It felt like something reclaimed. And this time, no one else was holding it. The first time Shelby returned to the Washington estate after everything collapsed, she didn't announce it. She simply arrived. The gates were open this time. Not because she was welcome, because there was no one left powerful enough to keep her out. Inside, the house felt different. Not warmer, not softer, just abandoned in a way wealth could never disguise. Expensive furniture still stood in perfect alignment, but the silence between the walls felt heavier than ever, like the building itself was holding its breath. Shelby walked slowly through the hallway. Her footsteps echoed differently now, not as a guest, not as Nathaniel's wife, as something else entirely. Ownership, maybe. Or truth. She didn't know yet. Grace Whitmore had called earlier that morning. "Nathaniel has been temporarily suspended from all advisory roles," she had said. "The board is collapsing internally. Richard Washington is refusing all public statements." Shelby hadn't responded immediately. She didn't feel victory. Not yet. Just inevitability. Now standing inside the house she once called home, she understood something important. This place had never belonged to love. It belonged to control. Nathaniel found her in the study. Of course he did. It was the only room she always avoided during arguments. Too many legal documents, too many closed doors, too many versions of truth she was never meant to see. He looked different now, not physically, but in presence. The sharp confidence had dulled, like something essential inside him had been stripped away and never replaced. Shelby didn't turn immediately. She kept looking at the shelves. "You came back," Nathaniel said quietly. Shelby nodded once. "I wanted to see what I was really living in." That sentence made him flinch slightly. He stepped closer, slower than usual. Careful. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Washington looked like a man unsure of how close he was allowed to stand. "You don't have to do this," he said. Shelby finally turned toward him. "No," she replied softly. "I already did it." Silence stretched between them. Not hostile, not soft, just final. Nathaniel's voice lowered. "You think I never cared about you?" Shelby studied him carefully. Not the man she loved, not the man she feared, just the truth of him. "I think you cared about controlling outcomes," she said, "and I was part of one." That landed heavily. Nathaniel looked down briefly, a rare moment of stillness. "I tried to protect you from what my father was involved in," he said finally. Shelby nodded slightly. "I know." That surprised him. Shelby continued, "And I think somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as separate from it." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." Shelby stepped closer now, but not emotionally, just deliberately, measured. "You didn't marry Shelby Washington," she said quietly. "You married Charlotte Bennett's legal position." His expression hardened immediately. "That's not true." But his voice lacked conviction now, because they both knew. It wasn't fully true, but it wasn't fully false either. That was the problem. Shelby walked past him slowly and placed a sealed envelope on the desk. Nathaniel stared at it. "What is this?" "Your exit," she said. He froze. Shelby continued calmly. "Grace drafted a settlement agreement. You cooperate with ongoing investigations, return diverted funds, and step away from all Bennett-linked advisory structures." Nathaniel didn't move. "And if I refuse?" Shelby met his eyes. "Then it stops being a conversation." That simplicity hit harder than threats. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment, then finally whispered, "You've changed." Shelby nodded once. "Yes." A pause. "I stopped adapting to survive you." That sentence lingered in the air like a final verdict. Nathaniel stepped back, slowly, as if distance could restore order. But it couldn't. Not anymore. Later that evening, Shelby stood alone in the living room of the estate. The same room where she once hosted dinners. The same room where she once laughed softly while pretending not to feel ignored. The same room where she learned how to be small enough to keep peace. Now it felt like a museum of a life she no longer belonged to. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. A familiar voice spoke. "Olivia." "She's dead," Olivia said quietly. Shelby's stomach tightened instantly. What Helen's investigation file just got fully unsealed. The media is already calling it a financial containment scandal. Shelby closed her eyes briefly. "So, it's public now?" "Yes." A pause. Then Olivia added softly, "Richard is going down with it." Shelby didn't respond immediately. She wasn't surprised. She was detached, like watching consequences finally catch up to people who spent years outrunning them. Olivia's voice lowered. "You won." Shelby almost laughed. "No," she said quietly. "I stopped losing." Silence. Then Olivia spoke again. "You should know. Nathaniel didn't sleep for 3 days after the suspension." Shelby's grip tightened slightly on the phone. "I don't need updates on him." "I know," Olivia admitted. "I just thought you should know he didn't fight it." Shelby frowned slightly. "That was unexpected." Olivia continued. "He signed everything. Full cooperation. No resistance." Shelby stared out the window. Manhattan lights stretched endlessly in the distance. And he asked for one thing," Olivia said. Shelby went still. What? To be removed from your life entirely. Silence. That word landed strangely. Not relief, not satisfaction, just emptiness. Olivia added quietly, "He said he understood he lost the right to be part of your story." Shelby closed her eyes for a long moment, then whispered, "He never had that right." The line went silent again. Then Olivia hung up. 2 weeks later, Shelby sat in Grace Whitmore's office signing the final documents. Bennett Holdings restructuring, victim restitution funds, foundation establishment paperwork. Every signature felt less like paperwork and more like rewriting reality. Grace watched her carefully. "You're sure about naming it the Helen Initiative?" Shelby nodded. "Yes." Grace hesitated. "She lied to you for years." Shelby looked down at the document. "I know." A pause. "But she also saved my life in ways I'll never fully understand." Grace didn't argue. Instead, she slid the final page forward. "And Charlotte Bennett." Shelby paused. For the first time, the name didn't feel foreign. It felt integrated. Not replacing Shelby Washington, not erasing her, just completing her. "She stays," Shelby said quietly. Grace smiled, faintly. As a legal identity, Shelby shook her head slightly. "As part of me." She signed the final line. Slowly, clearly, completely. Shelby Charlotte Bennett. The pen lifted, the moment ended, and nothing fell apart. That night, Shelby stood alone on a rooftop overlooking the city. Wind moved through her hair. Cold, clean, real. Her phone lay beside her, turned off. For the first time in months, no one was calling, no one was demanding, no one was manipulating. Just silence. Shelby looked out at the skyline. Everything she thought she lost had been replaced by something she never had before. Control, truth, selfhood. And as the city moved beneath her, Shelby finally understood something simple. She hadn't destroyed her old life. She had survived it and built something stronger in its place, something no one could rename, no one could contain, and no one could take again. The first morning Shelby woke up without fear felt almost unreal. No buzzing phone, no legal emergencies, no sudden emails disguised as clarifications. Just silence. Real silence. She sat in her apartment overlooking Manhattan, coffee, cooling in her hands, watching the city move like nothing had ever happened. But everything had happened, and nothing inside her was the same. Grace Whitmore had offered her something the day before, a final question delivered gently. "Now that everything is legally resolved, what do you want to build?" Shelby hadn't answered immediately, because for the first time, she wasn't reacting to survival. She was choosing direction. Now she understood the answer. 3 months later, the Helen Initiative officially opened its first center in downtown Manhattan. A restored brownstone building filled with light, soft colors and quiet rooms designed for women rebuilding their lives after financial and emotional abuse. Shelby stood at the entrance on opening day, watching people arrive. Not victims, not cases, survivors. Grace stood beside her, holding a folder, but not speaking. She didn't need to. Shelby adjusted her blazer slightly. Her nameplate at the entrance read, "Shelby Charlotte Bennett, founder and director." The name no longer felt like two competing identities. It felt whole. A woman who had been both erased and rebuilt. A woman who had survived being controlled. Inside the walls were lined with stories, not corporate charts, not financial graphs. Stories. Women who had lost everything because someone else controlled the numbers in their lives. Shelby read one quietly. "He told me I was bad with money. I believed him for 12 years. Another. "He said I was too emotional to make decisions, so I stopped making them." Shelby swallowed hard. She knew those sentences now, intimately, not as theory, as memory. Nathaniel Washington was no longer practicing law. That much was public. What wasn't public was how quietly he disappeared from the world he once dominated. No press interviews, no legal commentary, no corporate presence, just absence. A man who once controlled narratives had become one. Olivia Bennett had left the country entirely. Richard Washington's name had been removed from 3 boards within weeks of the investigation expanding. Everything they built collapsed, not loudly, but systematically, like truth dismantling structure one piece at a time. Shelby didn't follow their details anymore, not out of forgiveness, but because they no longer defined her direction. That evening, Shelby stood alone in the center of the initiative's main room after everyone had left. The lights were dim, soft, peaceful. She walked slowly through the space, touching nothing, just observing what she had created, from everything that was taken from her. At the far wall, a framed quote hung above the seating area. It read, "Your identity is not what they call you. It is what you refuse to become." Shelby stared at it for a long time. Then she smiled faintly, because she finally understood the difference between pain and identity. Pain was what happened to her. Identity was what she built afterward. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer, a familiar silence on the other end. Then Nathaniel's voice, low, careful, different. "Shelby." She didn't respond immediately, not because she was shocked, because she wasn't. "I'm not calling to reopen anything," he said quietly. A pause. "I just wanted to say I understand now." Shelby closed her eyes briefly. Not in pain, not in anger, just acknowledgement. Nathaniel continued. "I thought control was protection. I thought structure meant safety." His voice tightened slightly. "I was wrong." Silence stretched between them. Not heavy, just final. Shelby looked out at the empty room. "You didn't love me," she said softly. Nathaniel didn't interrupt. She continued. "You loved the version of me that didn't challenge your world." Another pause. Then she added, "And I loved a man who never existed outside that version." That truth landed quietly. No explosion, no collapse, just clarity. Nathaniel's voice lowered. "I hope you're okay." Shelby exhaled slowly. "I'm not the same person you knew." "I know." A pause. Then softer. "Maybe that's the point." Shelby opened her eyes. For the first time in their entire story, there was no tension in his voice. No control, no manipulation, just distance, acceptance. She nodded slightly even though he couldn't see it. "I hope you find peace," he said finally. Shelby considered that carefully. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just closure. "I already did," she replied. Then she ended the call. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just completely. Later that night, Shelby stood on the rooftop of the Initiative building. Wind moved gently through her hair. The city below looked the same as it always had, but she didn't. She thought about Helen, about Elizabeth, about Charlotte, about Shelby. 4 versions of a woman who had all existed inside one life. She no longer felt broken between them. She felt built from them. Her phone remained off in her pocket. For the first time, no one was waiting for her to respond. No one was shaping her choices. No one was defining her identity. Shelby took a slow breath. Not because she needed to calm down, but because she finally could. And as the wind moved across the skyline, she understood something she had spent her entire life learning the hard way. She had not been saved. She had not been owned. She had not been lost. She had been returned to herself. And this time, no one could take her away again. When Shelby Washington finally stopped running from the truth, from the pain, from the versions of her life other people had written for her, she discovered something terrifying at first, and then deeply freeing. Healing was not a moment where everything suddenly made sense. It was not justice arriving like a perfect ending. It was the slow, painful realization that the life she had trusted was built on decisions she never got to make. And yet, she still had the power to decide what came next. What broke Shelby the most was not betrayal alone. It was the silence wrapped around it. The years of being told she was too emotional, too sensitive, not capable of understanding, when in reality those words were used to keep her from seeing how much control she was already losing. And yet, when the truth finally came, she did not collapse into it. She grew through it. Shelby's story is not just about betrayal or revenge. It is about reclamation. The moment she stopped asking for permission to trust herself was the moment everything changed. She learned that kindness is not weakness, but kindness without boundaries becomes a doorway for manipulation. She learned that love without respect is not love at all. It is control wearing a softer face. And most importantly, she learned that losing people who benefit from your silence is not a tragedy. It is a form of survival. What Nathaniel and the Washington world never understood is that you cannot permanently contain a person who starts remembering who they are. Once Shelby saw the truth, she didn't become someone new, she became someone whole. The fragments of Shelby, Charlotte, daughter, wife, survivor, they all finally belonged to the same woman. And that is the real message of her journey. You do not need to become someone else to escape a painful past. You need to stop abandoning yourself inside it. If this story moved you, think about this. How many times have you ignored your own instincts just to keep peace? How many times have you mistaken control for care? And what version of yourself are you ready to take back? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know how this story made you feel. And if you enjoy emotional cinematic storytelling like this, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about betrayal, awakening, and powerful self-reclamation.